One of the things about this book that I was exceptionally specific about is that it is a book on the business side of the profession, but it's also specifically when you want to kind of drift your career into the direction of doing what I call, and what is commonly called in the industry everywhere, scripted on camera. Now, that can be both film and television scripted. It could also be commercials. Some of those are not scripted, but what it isn't is the book does not specifically as much about the concept of theater performance, and it's certainly not as much about other aspects as much of the industry. But in general, it is a very, very specific motivational, educational book on the business side of the profession. Yeah, one of the things about the book that I unequivocally will say is that it's not just for beginners at all, because the concept of everything I've been discussing since 1991, since I founded the Actors Network, has always been philosophical based and psychological based, so that whether you were doing this for 1 month or whether you were doing this for 10 years, there would always be something on a subject or a technique that I came up with in terms of pursuing this career that would still be of value to you. And one of the things about this profession is it's incredibly individual. It's incredibly subjective. So what someone who's been doing this for 2 years thinks about a subject and someone who's been doing this for 20 years isn't necessarily as drastically different as we may think it may be in other industries. So the book follows obviously the seven deadly sins, which is the backdrop that I chose for it, because we deal with human frailty, which is what the seven deadly sins are. And the business side of this profession is so humanly difficult for us as performers that's what I wanted to use for the foundation. But the book itself has 5 traps and 5 solutions inside of each sin. So technically, there's actually 70 little chapters that are all predicated on some of the things that we face that we have to both be wary of and then also overcome. Do I practice what I preach?
Yes.
Unequivocally. Absolutely. Now, in this particular book, I have technically probably 100 to 125 hours in my head. That comes from the curriculum that I created over 2 decades at the Actors Network, where we had what we called topical discussions. That's where a lot of these things came from, and they were an hour and a half long discussions with people sitting in a room in front of me. Now, in this book, there are probably about 45 or 50 of those that are actually in here, along with some that, with regards to the traps, are a little more ethereal than some of the literal techniques that I discussed. But unequivocally do I follow exactly what's in here, because that's where it comes from. It came from my own experience. I think probably the biggest thing for me putting this on paper is this isn't some intellectual above the neck book, even though it is hopefully a very intelligent book on the business side of the profession. All of the content of this book is literally from the pain of mistakes I made, from the exact experience that I've had in Los Angeles since 1987, good, bad, indifferent, all codified into concepts and actual techniques, both that are subjective, dealing with people, and also pragmatic and practical actions that you can take to actually pursue your career, as opposed to doing you already know, what people know and commonly are aware of me saying, which is just breathing with a headshot and going to class. And that's what most actors do. They breathe with a headshot in whatever city they're in, Sydney, London, here, and they go to class. And there's just a lot more that you can accomplish. So it was painstaking for me to actually edit this down. I probably had 30 or 40 pages of material that came out of this book, because I do speak, and I publicly speak all the time, and there's just too much stuff in my head. But it's also really specific to different individual people and where they're at. So the book allows you to both kind of look at things a little more black and white, but it also allows you to apply it to where you are today. Because you can read the book 6 months into being Los Angeles or 5 years into being New York, and you could go back and pick up any chapter of this book and look at it 3 years later, and it would still have value, and it would still be applicable to where you are at that point in your career. It's actually not hard for me at all, because the one thing in this book is actually the first solution, which is called the decision, which is what no one ever asks of us as an actor. They never ask us to stop and think about the difference between wanting to perform but becoming a product for sale, which is the business side of show business. And the decision to do that cognitively in a quiet space within your soul, of the difference between loving to perform and being a goofball, but then actually putting yourself in the position of being a human product for sale, is a Grand Canyon.
And that decision is unequivocally the number one premise behind everything in this book.